From the State House in Augusta, this is Maine Public's live coverage of Governor Janet Mills' State of the State address. This is Mills' final scheduled address before a joint session of the legislature. Here are Maine Public political correspondent Kevin Miller, Susan Cover of Spectrum News, and Maine Public's chief political correspondent Steve Mistler.
Good evening and welcome to Governor Mills' second final State of the State address. We're expecting her to enter the chamber any moment. We're going to talk about basically what she's going to talk about this evening. And this is a different State of the State address, Kevin, because normally these speeches are basically a look back at accomplishments. But this year is going to be a lot different because Governor Mills is running for the U.S. Senate, and that is going to change the dynamic of this speech, isn't it?
Yeah, it certainly is. So this race is of huge national importance here in the state of Maine, of course, but this race could help decide control of Congress. It's unclear how much Governor Mills will talk about the Senate race. This technically is a speech of the governor. This is not a campaign speech. She's not supposed to be talking about Senator Susan Collins and her primary campaign to try to defeat her. But I think it's almost, you can't argue this, politically speaking, this is going to just dominate everything that we see in the State House this year and everything that comes from the governor and how the legislature responds to the governor, especially the Republicans. And so we'll have to wait and see how much she says in the speech.
Sue Cover?
Yeah, and what I'll be looking for is what kind of tone do we see from the governor? We're obviously facing some difficult times, but oftentimes these kinds of speeches, there's a lot of applause and the party in power stands up and supports their governor and makes a big production of showing how much they support her, and the party that's not in power sits and maybe shakes their head and shows disapproval. So what kind of tone the governor sets right out of the gate, how much she goes into policy specifics versus maybe kind of, like Kevin said, highlighting some things that might appeal to voters who are thinking about the Senate race at this point.
Right, and this particular speech comes at a very politically fraught moment. Right now in Maine, there's an immigration surge that's really been dominating the news over the last couple of weeks. Of course, that's in conjunction with the immigration surge in Minnesota, which has kind of colored the debate here. Do you think that she's going to talk about that much, Kevin, during this speech tonight?
I think it's almost impossible that she doesn't talk about it in some way, right? Because this has just been the dominant story here in Maine and across the country for the past couple of weeks. And we are seeing these immigration actions not nearly as aggressive so far as what we've seen in Minnesota, but we are seeing people picked up off the street. We're seeing protests. So I think it would be almost impossible for her not to bring this up. How much she talks about it, that's really unclear. She's been very outspoken so far as her attitude towards this. She's been critical of President Trump. She's called on President Trump to remove ICE agents from Maine. She's asked for a meeting with President Trump, and so far, at least as of today, from what the Mills administration has told us, is they haven't heard back from the president to that request. So
no big surprise there.
Right, no surprise at all. They don't have the best relations as we've seen for the past year. But I think it's clear that she has to bring it up in some way.
Sue Cover?
Yeah, and so she'll bring it up. Does she take on President Trump directly? Does she mention him by name? Does she just call him the chief executive or the president? The other thing we've seen out of Minnesota is their governor has finally made some headway in meeting with President Trump about removal of ICE agents, and maybe the governor might be thinking of that and thinking maybe she tones down a little bit of her opposition to the way that these, the ICE agents and others have played out in other states, and maybe there's a different approach for her to take as she looks to lead us as governor, but again, also kind of showing voters what she might do if she were in the Senate.
Well, it's interesting too, because this governor has served her 2 terms during some very historically significant moments in history, right? There was the COVID-19 pandemic, which, basically stopped all operations of the state government, legislature. She was ruling with emergency powers during that time, Kevin. There was the largest mass shooting in state history in Lewiston that she was governor for, and now this, which is this tension between states, in particular Democratic-run states, and the Trump administration, and what that looks like a lot over the last year, especially, has been a lot of conflict.
Right.
What does that, what does that come up tonight, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, the tension has been pretty much nonstop since the president came into office. We saw the biggest kind of explosion in this tension focused on the issue of transgender athletes. That started last February and still going. That issue is actually still in the courts. But then we've seen the cuts to federal research. We've seen the cuts to state agencies. We've seen cuts that have been specifically targeted at Maine and no other state. And again, those have been tied up in the courts too. So, like I said, those tensions have been kind of omnipresent throughout this time with the governor and the president. We've also seen some uncertainty most recently about ACA subsidies. So I'll be curious to see like how much she decides to address of that in the speech.
Right, and so Cover, I mean, talk about that a little bit more, I think, because there have been bills passed by the Republican-controlled Congress that affect Maine in specific ways, cuts to specific programs. And I think there's been certainly bills that have been introduced during the legislative session that are designed to have the state cover those costs. Do you think that will come up at all tonight?
Oh, it definitely will, because part of this speech will be about her supplemental budget and how she intends to spend the revenues that the state has available. And just today we heard about an initiative for her to fund $2.25 million toward women's reproductive health care. Throughout her time in office, the governor has been a staunch supporter of women and their reproductive rights. So that's one, fairly small budget item there. And I think every time we've all seen the governor and we hear about these cuts from the federal funding, we say, do we have the money to pick up that money? Does the state have the funding to do that? And her answer is typically, we can do some of it, but we can't do all of it because there's no way the state has the resources to fill in all of those federal initiatives.
Right, and I mean, the state is sitting on a pretty healthy rainy day fund and a surplus, and there's always calls for her to tap into that, but she's thus far resisted the urge or those calls to actually do that. Maybe tonight would be different. Kevin, what do you think?
Yeah, it's very, very possible because this is her last year in office. I'm sure she kind of wants to make a political statement, especially with the Senate campaign hanging over her. As you said, to this point, she has resisted tapping into that, and that rainy day fund is capped at $1 billion. It actually can't go any higher. So despite Republicans, and we often hear Republicans criticizing the governor for her spending, and the state budget has clearly grown by significant amounts during her term, but at the same time, the state's savings have increased significantly. So I think all of us will be really curious to see when her supplemental budget comes out, potentially next week, what is actually in there and whether she does tap into the rainy day fund for anything.
And the flip side of that is that progressives have put a lot of pressure on her to tap into that rainy day fund, to fund things like housing, childcare, other needs that they believe are really important. And I hear people say, well, there should be some money in the rainy day fund, but it doesn't need to be quite as large as it is.
Right.
So the other thing we hear a lot from Democrats now is talk about affordability. Are there some measures in there to help folks better afford their lives here in Maine?
That's right, and affordability is a big talking point for Democrats in this particular year. This is a midterm election year. They learned their lesson from 2024 when inflation was, very much on the mind of voters. And they're now trying to flip the script a little bit because now it's Republicans that are in control, at least in Congress and in the White House, and prices haven't gone down. And so I wonder, Kevin, do you think that will be something that she talks about this evening? Affordability measures or steps that she could take, and what could those possibly be from a governor?
Right, and that's what the big question, right? The way we hear about affordability is what can government do, and especially what can state government do? We have seen the Democrats and the Republicans have been harping on this for years now, and we saw the legislature and the governor take some significant steps, especially on housing affordability, when it comes to programs to encourage more first-time homeowners and to allow seniors to stay in their houses longer and to help residents of mobile home parks. So we've been seeing that repeatedly throughout the Mills administration, and oftentimes those have been bipartisan initiatives. I think with this being 2026, being an election year, and with the control of the legislature being at stake, I mean, Democrats have a very narrow majority in the House right now. They have a bigger majority in the Senate, but the legislature is very much in play, as well as Congress. So I think both parties are going to be making this affordability argument over and over again. And I'm not sure how much can get done, though,
Right.
because of those partisan politics.
Well, and one thing we've seen that the governor has done was free community college. That was a major initiative coming out of the pandemic for those students who were stuck at home for a year or two and didn't see a path for them beyond high school. So that free community college was necessary. However, as we saw in the last budget, it didn't get funded. So that might be another way to help folks who are struggling to pay for higher education. We know we need trained workforce. We need folks for specific industries. When you look at it as part of an economic development plan, it certainly makes sense for the state to help folks afford higher education.
Yeah, and we've heard, officials from the Maine community college system talk about how that particular program brought kids, students that may not have actually considered higher education, but they actually decided to go the community college route because it was free for the first 2 years. So, it'd be interesting to see if that actually continues. I mean, as you mentioned, the legislature did not fund that. Even though it was in the governor's budget proposal last year, they decided not to fund that initiative because they had other priorities. So we'll have to wait and see if that surfaces tonight. I think the other thing that will undoubtedly be covered in this speech is her accomplishments. I mean, some of the things that we've heard over the past 7 years is, her ability to direct money to local public education, that 55% threshold that was never met until I think it was 2019 or the 2021 budget, where she actually met that 55%. Where states were paying that much to local school districts. That's a heavy burden year to year on the state budget, but she's been committed to keeping that going, and I suspect that that's something she'll talk about this evening along with some of her other accomplishments, Kevin.
Yeah, I think that 55%, she's going to want to keep that in place. That's been one of the hallmarks of her administration, as well as the free community college program. I mean, it's interesting to think that she proposed continuing that last year, and the legislature, the Democratic-controlled legislature, decided to basically pause it or freeze it or stop it beginning with this graduating class. She's now running for Senate. I'm sure she wants to keep that program going. And of course, Democrats want to kind of give her that feather in her cap. So just thinking that maybe that might be a talking point again this year as we head into new budget negotiations. But I think it's interesting, we'll hear from the Republicans after the governor speaks, and we got a little bit of a preview of what they had to say today. And they basically blame the governor and Democrats for a lot of the cost increases we've seen in the state. Higher energy costs, higher electricity costs, higher food costs. And they say that this is all because of Democratic government rule. So the Republicans are making clear that that's going to be their argument headed into 2026. So we'll see how much the governor addresses that during the speech as well.
Yeah, Sue Cover, I think that Kevin talks about something that's very interesting because I think the Republicans look at that budget surplus in a different way, right? They see that as, well, the state is collecting too much money, and therefore there should be tax cuts. We've heard that over and over and over again ever since Governor Mills has led the state since 2019. So I wonder, what happens like with that argument? Does she address that tonight? Is that obviously she's not going to pass tax cuts, but she probably doesn't want to raise any taxes either.
Yeah, that would be my assumption as well. Tax reform is long and complicated. It's important to bear in mind that this is the short legislative session, so lawmakers are only going to be here for another probably 10 weeks. So things that are going to get done are going to have to be pretty straightforward and simple. Another affordability measure that we've seen in recent years are relief checks. And we don't know if that might be something that could be proposed or done again, if that could be something that the governor would pay for out of her rainy day fund, or if there are other monies available for that. As you try to look at ways to tackle the affordability crisis, I think that might be one way to directly funnel relief to folks that they could use right away. They wouldn't have to wait to file their taxes to get a child tax credit or something else that takes a long time to develop.
Right, and less paperwork, right? You just get a check in the mail if you're a taxpayer. So, and this, like as you mentioned, Susan, I mean, this has happened a couple of times. There was the COVID relief checks, and then there was the energy relief checks that came shortly after because of the price of heating fuel in particular. And so I guess I wonder, Kevin, that's a possibility, right? That could happen this go around, especially with a surplus. Of course, that would be one-time relief, right? It's not ongoing, whereas Republicans would probably argue that tax cuts would be something that could, go on and on, because it's actually very hard to reverse a tax cut once you've passed one.
Right, exactly. As Sue mentioned, you mentioned that Republicans have been pushing for tax cuts throughout their time, ever since Governor LePage was in office, Republican Governor Paul LePage was in office. And their argument is, instead of, spending this surplus on additional government programs, especially social service programs, we should be returning that to the Maine people. So I'm sure that we're going to hear those same arguments play out again this session. We do have a surplus. We have a very small surplus that lawmakers are going to just have to decide how to spend. But kind of to your question about the potential rebate checks, I mean, we also have this $1 billion rainy day fund. So that is a pool of money that's available to help in emergency situations. And there's a lot of arguments out there right now that the rising costs of electricity and of heat, especially during this winter when it's been so cold and so snowy, a lot of people are struggling with their heating costs right now.
And one thing I'll be interested to see, we've mentioned obviously the looming campaign for U.S. Senate. The governor does face a primary challenger, and tonight she has a statewide television and radio audience. This is a big platform for her. Might be an opportunity to highlight some things that could win over some voters. Maybe they're Grand Plattner voters right now, but maybe they'll change their mind. Or looking ahead, maybe there are some Susan Collins voters who might be looking for a different option this time around. So she'll have to kind of walk that fine line between, giving a speech as governor and, really creating a historical record, because that's what these speeches are. I'm sure we've all, run to the law library and look back 50 years or 100 years to say, who was governor and what did they do and what was their impact? And so I'm sure that's on her mind too. I mean, we don't think as much about maybe legacies for governors, but this is her final major speech, and this is her chance to kind of lay out a lot of those priorities and maybe win over some folks.
Yeah, that's right. I'm really glad you mentioned the primary, because we've seen because it is a competitive primary, between Governor Mills and Graham Plattner, this insurgent candidate who came from really out of nowhere, right? And he's kind of touting this working class persona, and also that's who he's targeting in his messaging. And not only is he targeting working class voters, but he's also targeting disaffected Democratic voters, right, who are unhappy with the direction of the party, or they're unhappy with how the party is pushing back against the President Trump. I don't know if that will ever surface in this speech tonight, but we've seen just in the last, couple of months, some decisions by the governor that she may not have made if she were not facing that primary. What do you think about that, Kevin?
Right. Yeah, I mean, the governor, I think we've seen in all of her previous 7 State of the State or state budget addresses, she loves kind of the soaring rhetoric. She loves kind of painting pictures with words, and she often quotes poetry. She's a poet herself. I wouldn't be surprised if we see some of that, but I think kind of to your point, right now there's almost a battle, it's cliche to say kind of a battle for the soul of the Democratic Party that's going on right now. And right now, Governor Mills and Graham Plattner are the 2 leading candidates, and they have very different messages. They have very different styles. They have very different approaches. And Governor Mills has been a fairly moderate Democrat. She's been more moderate than a lot of the Democrats in the legislature wanted her to be. Does that change during her last session, or last legislative session? Maybe. Maybe we'll see some hints of some changes there as well.
I guess we're about to hear the herald here.
Hear ye! Make way, make way! Make way for Her Excellency, the Governor and Commander-in-Chief of the State of Maine, the Honorable Janet T. Mills, and the Chief Justice of the Maine Supreme Judicial Court, Valerie Stanfield.
And there we see the governor entering the House chamber right now. We're hearing from where we sit a lot of screaming and yelling from protesters. There's protesters on both sides out in the hallways just outside the House chamber, and they're very audible to us, and I'm sure those voices are being heard in that House chamber as well. Glad to see the governor has made it. This is a long delay, I have to say. I think last year it was like 15 minutes. This is a solid 20. So glad that glad that she's here, because not that we're going to run out of things to talk about necessarily, but
Well, and I think it's important, to set the stage too. This is our first woman governor. It's, been 7 years, so it's been a little while, but it's important to remember that. She's 78 years old. She certainly hopes to continue her political future, but, as you mentioned, there's been a lot of major historical events that have happened during her tenure as well.
that's right. And you mentioned the age, which of course is I know that's been discussed a lot in the Democratic primary in the Senate race. Graham Plattner's 41 years old. The governor's 78. I know the age is not just in relation to the governor. That's actually a complaint or a critique of the Democratic Party or its leadership writ large, isn't it, Kevin?
Yeah, it is, and I think again that goes back to this fight for this whole Democratic Party and to turn out Democratic voters, but also independent voters this time around, because this is a semi-open primary. So I think that's going to be a really kind of interesting key to see whether folks can bring forward the independent voters to participate in the primary.
Yep. And the governor's making her way up to the lectern now, and let's hear what she has to say.
Thank you. Thank you. Madam President, Mr. Speaker, Madam Chief Justice, Mr. Attorney General, Mr. Treasurer, Mr. Auditor, Chief Nicholas, Chief McCormick, Chief Bassett, members of my cabinet, members of the 132nd legislature, and friends and members of my extended and beloved family, and Maine people watching and listening at home. On July 4th, 1976, shortly after 4:30 a.m., about 500 farmers stood in the darkness before the dawn. And when the first rays of the rising sun shone on Mars Hill, they cheered and raised the flag as the first Americans to celebrate the 200th anniversary of the founding of this nation. A celebration that began in Mars Hill soon stretched from coast to coast as millions of people expressed their love for our country after years of division and difficulties. Shootings at Kent State had rocked the nation. The Vietnam War had finally come to an end, and Americans looked forward to peace in our time. Our country had survived the national scandal of Watergate and had put behind us the crimes and cover-ups of those who valued political loyalty over their duty to the courts and to the Constitution. One observer watching the crowds that July 4th day in 1976 said proudly, "The backbone of America is out there." As the Wabanaki people know, our backbone here in Maine is the mountains from which we draw our common strength and fortitude. We are the product of many hills, the irregular glacial terrain, the eskers, erratics, and the roaming boulders that form the character of our people and the destiny of our state. This very Capitol building towers over the grounds of Capitol Park, where Governor Israel Washburn in 1861 mustered the boys of Maine to preserve the Union and end the horrible practice of slavery. And from this place, we too can see, as did those courageous men, the quiet prominence of Howard Hill, which looks down on us today, and which forms the rugged skyline of this capital city. Every part of Maine dares us ever to climb, to be discontent with the flat spaces and plains and seek higher ground at every turn, and to be tireless in the defense of our people, our state, our nation. It is an instinct, an attribute, and mark of our character, a reflection of our natural strength that is as enduring and deep as the granite bedrock of Mount Katahdin. It is what compels us to stand fast against injustice, to rise against tyranny, to defend those who cannot defend themselves. It is an instinct that is as important as ever in this very moment. As people in this state are speaking with moral clarity to protect their neighbors and their communities against federal agents who seek to intimidate and silence us, today I say to the people of Maine, we will not be intimidated. We will not be silenced. And to anyone outside these halls, including any federal officials, I say, if you seek to harm Maine people, you will have to go through me first. We will climb this hill together, you and I, just as we have over the past 7 years, confronting dangerous terrains and stepping out of treacherous places in order to secure a foothold for Maine people in the upward climb of progress. And so we enter this, the 250th year of our nation's birth, with continued respect for our founding principles and a commitment to democracy, with an unequal determination to preserve the future of our country and our Constitution. Tonight marks my 8th and final time addressing a joint session of the legislature. In every moment that we've gathered in this chamber, it has been my profound honor, yes, an honor and privilege to be elected to serve the people of Maine, you who are the very backbone of our state, as your governor. I sought this office with one goal in mind, and it wasn't to break a glass ceiling by becoming the first woman governor, though I'm proud to help show others, including young girls, that it is possible. It was also not to become the first governor from Franklin County, though I'm proud to claim it as my home, along with legendary Maine guide Fly Rod Crosby, earmuff inventor Chester Greenwood, and others. But it is the people of Maine who are and always have been my North Star. And I sought this office because I believe they deserved better from their government. And it would have been easy for me, it would have been easy for all of you to sit back and allow others to carry the burdens of leadership. But as Senator Robert F. Kennedy Sr. once said, it is more comfortable to sit content in the easy approval of friends and of neighbors than to risk the friction and the controversy that comes with public affairs. And so we have assumed the mantle of controversy that comes with public affairs. But surely no one could even have predicted 7 years ago the friction and controversies we would encounter. We would confront the dangers, the crises, tragedies, and heartbreaks that we would endure. Climbing mountains to overcome obstacles and keep Maine people safe. Well, ultimately, Maine people will judge how well we met these moments. But tonight I want to tell you what these moments have meant to me. I'm convinced that history will show that when we faced emergencies, we were steady and strong. And when we found ways to make life better for Maine people, we were bold and brave, and we climbed those hills together. Beginning in the first year of my administration, we restored nursing and other critical public health staff to respond to emergencies after years of cuts by the previous administration. And thank God those nurses were there, along with our National Guard and our healthcare workforce, retired and active, to answer the call when a worldwide pandemic struck. But thanks to them, and thanks to the scientists who developed the vaccines, and to all the people who rolled up their sleeves, our state achieved one of the lowest COVID death rates in the country. Very simply, we saved lives. You all survived because of those vaccines. And a few years later, when a horrific act of violence in Lewiston robbed us of 18 loved ones and caused our state immeasurable pain, we stood together with one another, with the families of victims and the deaf community, the survivors, the wounded, and the heroic members of law enforcement and first responders. And we did not let the vitriol and heated rhetoric surrounding the issue of gun violence immobilize us. Instead, we took meaningful steps to prevent violence, to protect public safety, and expand mental health services. Then later, when deadly storms devastated communities across the state, we responded with the largest investment in storm relief in state history, revitalizing our working waterfronts, reinforcing infrastructure, and rebuilding local businesses to better withstand extreme weather. We came together to enact bipartisan legislation sponsored by every legislative leader to protect homeowners and businesses and prepare for the storms we know are to come. So the backbone of this state, Maine people, met these emergencies with strength and courage, in some cases risking their own lives to save others, and then offering their help with quiet kindness and selfless acts of grace. As we reflect upon these moments, let us also remember those we lost this year, including our beloved lobster lady, Ginny Oliver of Rockland, and Penobscot tribal elder and distinguished decorated veteran Charles Norman Shea. Lawmakers such as Kathy Javner, Denise Harlow, Stan Grozovsky, Linda McKee, Dick Gould, Carol McElwee, Bill Diamond, Carl Turner, Ruth Foster, along with DOT workers James Brown and Dwayne Campbell, who tragically lost their lives recently while serving the people of Maine. And let us pause to remember two young children, Braden Callahan of Rockland and Simon Gonzalez of Standish, who lost their lives in the everyday act of just getting on or off the school bus. Thank you. Well, as is tradition, tonight I'm proud to stand before you one final time and say that despite our challenges, I believe the state of our state is strong. Let me talk about the economy first. Under my administration, Maine's economy has grown at a faster rate than many other states. It's true. In fact, we've experienced more economic growth in my first 6 years of office than we did in the entire 14 years before that. And I'm proud to say we've seen an increase of 16,200 private sector jobs in our state. And last year, nearly 15,000 new businesses filed to operate here in Maine. And many other businesses, like the Taste of Maine Potato Chip Company in Limestone, are experiencing significantly expanding their workplace, their workforce, and their footprint. Through my Jobs and Recovery Plan, more than 20,000 men and women enrolled in job training programs, many of them earning a new license or credential in a higher paying job, like in healthcare, electrical, welding, plumbing, construction, and other good paying occupations. Oh, and Maine's unemployment rate has been below 4% for nearly 4 years, one of the longest stretches ever. And it's consistently below both the New England and the state unemployment rates. Our state's credit ratings have been upgraded to the second highest possible rating after being downgraded during the previous administration. An upgrade which the credit agencies say is due to our strong fiscal governance. You're welcome. At the same time, we've also focused on the infrastructure that you need, you rely on to go to work every day, to go to school, just to get around. We've repaired nearly 200 bridges, repaved nearly 8,000 miles of roads everywhere, and working with hundreds of internet service providers and communities, we've connected more than 250,000 homes and businesses with the internet. As a matter of fact, right now, every person who wants an internet connection has access to one, thanks to the good work of the Maine Connectivity Authority, fulfilling the promise I made to you here in 2022. You're welcome. We're making it easier for people to live, work, and do business everywhere in Maine, everywhere. People like Rob and Alice, a couple who wanted to move to a small town in Maine, but they needed high-speed internet for work. So 7 years ago, there was no way they could have moved to a place like Bremen, Maine, and have fast enough internet. But thanks to our investments in broadband, that's exactly what they did. Now, Alice and Rob are deeply involved in their community, and just this past fall, they welcomed a baby boy to their family. We're growing here, folks, we're growing. I'm proud of this economic progress, but like every other state, we have our fair share of hills to climb. One of the biggest obstacles for many people today, whether you're a new college grad, or a young parent, an older person on fixed income, one of the biggest obstacles is the high cost of living. From healthcare to housing and utilities, to the price of a pickup truck, groceries, and life-saving medicines. Costs are too high. And Maine people, like millions of people across the country, are feeling it. Well, tonight, I propose we do something about it. First, let's remember, over the past 7 years, on several occasions, we have put money back in the pockets of Maine people to help them get through difficult times. With bipartisan support, in 2021, for instance, during the pandemic, we sent over 500,000 people a disaster relief payment of $285. Again, in 2022, again with bipartisan support, we sent inflation relief checks of $850 to 880,000 people. And in 2023, again with bipartisan support, we sent 880,000 people an energy relief check of $450. That's a total of nearly $1.3 billion in relief that we've delivered to Maine people with high costs, to deal with high costs. We did this in recognition of tough times and in recognition that each family, each person has different needs. Giving money directly back to them allows them to decide how best to address these needs. For 80-year-old Peg in Pembroke, for instance, who lives on Social Security, her $850 relief check meant a tank of heating oil to help get her through the winter. Or for Terry in Hamden, her relief check paid for food and gas and much-needed car repairs. She said, quote, "Please know that all of you have helped at least one person breathe easier," end quote. Well, that's what this is all about, helping Maine people breathe easier. So over the past few months, my administration put together the supplemental budget, and will come before you soon. We asked ourselves again and again, how can we help people in the fastest, most direct, most meaningful way? And we thought, well, why reinvent the wheel? Why create a new process, new forms, or new hoops to jump through? So tonight, I propose that we help Maine people breathe a little easier with what we can, where we can, by sending them an affordability relief check for $300 each, drawn from our record-high rainy day fund to offset in some small way the cost of goods and groceries that are increasing because of tariffs and other circumstances beyond our state's control. An estimated 725,000 Maine people will be eligible for the affordability relief check. And as in the past, we would cap it at an income of, say, $75,000 for single filer, 112,000 something for a household, head of household, and 150,000 for joint filers. We're putting tax dollars back in your pockets, and you will have the freedom to decide what to do with it. You're welcome. And let me explain. Our rainy day fund, thanks to good bipartisan work of the legislature, stands at its legal maximum of more than $1 billion, a balance that is nearly 5 times greater than when I took office. The fund is in a strong position, sufficient for us to draw upon it to meet some of the immediate needs of Maine people. I ask that you promptly approve this measure. And while we're at it, let's continue to tackle one of the most significant issues facing Maine people, the high cost of housing. The prospect of home ownership used to be the cornerstone of the American dream, a gateway to financial stability, but today that dream is out of reach for many. The median price for a home in Maine is at $405,000, a record high that is only slightly lower than the national price of $414,000 and some change. The national news is filled with stories about the difficulties in renting or buying a house from California to Connecticut. Almost 30% of all Americans are house poor. That is, they spend 30% or more of their incomes on housing. The entire nation is short millions of units of housing for rent or for sale. High interest rates, supply chain constraints, and labor shortages have made the situation even worse. And the president's tariffs on aluminum, steel, and other building materials have driven up costs and slowed new construction at a time when we need it most. Since I took office, my administration has authorized nearly $315 million to help with housing. Nearly 5 times more than the state of Maine spent on housing production from 2000 to 2018. In the past year alone, my administration and Maine Housing have financed more than 1,000 affordable homes, mostly new construction. One of those developments is Wilbur's Woods in Brunswick. It's 21 new single-family homes, which have sold for well below the median home price in Cumberland County. Kathy Amsden has lived and worked in Maine all her life, but when she was getting ready to retire and ready to downsize, she couldn't find a smaller place within her budget. When Wilbur's Woods became available, she was one of the first people to move in. Another new housing development built with state funds is Congress Square Apartments, 48 units, an apartment building in Belfast. One young woman named Linda, who works at a local business, said she was really relieved to find a place to rent that was within her budget. Those affordable apartments will keep more young people living and working in Maine. And together we enacted historic legislation to knock down the barriers to housing in Maine, and we created the Mobile Home Preservation Fund, helping mobile home residents purchase their own parks before the wealthy out-of-state corporations could move in, swoop in, and buy them out from under them and evict the residents. And so far, residents have purchased 13 mobile home parks in Maine, creating long-term stability for those people. You're welcome. More will follow. In fact, just yesterday, residents of a mobile home park in Jay became the first to sign an agreement to purchase their own park under our new right of first refusal law. And a member of the Blueberry Fields Cooperative in Brunswick, when this happened in Brunswick, had been afraid that his rent was going to be going up by $400, $500 a month if his mobile home park went up for sale. As someone on a very low fixed income, he knew he couldn't pay that, neither could his neighbors. But with state support, The Blueberry Fields Cooperative purchased their mobile home park, protecting it as affordable housing for years to come. As that man put it, quote, "We are now in charge of our destinies here," end quote. It's been said that life is measured not by what you build, but by who you lift. Well, here in Maine, we're both building and lifting lives up so that people can be in charge of their own destinies. We can't give up on the American dream. Not when young families can't find a house that fits their budget. Not when retirees want to downsize but can't find a smaller place at a reasonable cost. Not when businesses are losing workers because they can't find housing nearby. So tonight, I'm announcing a $70 million American Dream proposal to further expand housing in Maine. First, I propose 2 new pilot programs backed by $17.5 million in one-time funds from the Rainy Day Fund, administered by Maine Housing, to build 530 new homes and apartments for middle-class families. Second, with another one-time infusion from the Rainy Day Fund, I propose that we increase our investments in those very successful housing programs that we already have by $52.5 million, which will in turn trigger at least $15 million in matching funds. In total, this American Dream proposal will result in 825 new homes all across Maine. It's the American dream. Now let's talk about education, which represents about 41% of the entire state budget, as you know. In the last 7 years, we've built a strong pipeline from classroom to career for young people across Maine, from pre-K to post-grad. We've increased research and development funding for the University of Maine, which in turn has earned a prestigious R1 designation, placing it among our top research universities in America. You're welcome. And during that period, the University of Maine system has conferred 42,416 degrees and credentials, including a record high number of degrees in high-demand fields like engineering, computing, healthcare, business, teaching, and new technologies. And as a result of our investments and UMaine's good work, the university system is realizing its 7th straight semester of increased enrollment. Chancellor Malloy, President Farini Mundi, and Board of Trustees Chair Trish Riley, I believe you're here tonight, and I want to thank you for the great work you've been doing. And I want to congratulate the University of Maine and the University of Maine Graduate Workers Union, UAW, for recently negotiating their first ever collective bargaining contract. Thank you for that hard work. And of course, we've also increased funding for the Maine Maritime Academy for campus improvements and operations over the past 7 years, making it an extremely attractive institution for an increasing number of students and graduates who will go on to good-paying careers in the maritime industries. I believe President of Maine Maritime Academy, Craig Johnson, is here with us tonight, and I want to thank him for his work, too. And finally, oh yeah, we made community college, 2 years of community college, free. We did. You're welcome. More than 23,000 students have taken advantage of our free community college program to date, with many more scheduled to achieve a degree or certificate over the next 2 years. Nearly 2,000 of those students have transferred to the University of Maine or other four-year colleges. Free community college grads have gone on to work in Maine. Grads like Tori Weil. Tori grew up in Gray, building things with her grandfather in his woodworking shop, and she knew that someday she wanted to be a builder herself. She couldn't afford to go to college, but our free community college program allowed her to get a degree in building construction technology. And Tori recently helped build a new electrical lab at Central Maine Community College in Auburn. Tori and Vice President of the Maine Community College System, Dr. Betsy Libby, are here with us tonight, and I want to acknowledge and congratulate them on their great work. The free community college program has made a life-changing difference for thousands of Maine young people, and that's why, as part of my budget last year, I had proposed making it permanent. Well, the legislature, in balancing many considerations, agreed to continue it through the class of 2025. Look, education opens doors of opportunity, and so tonight, I'm taking another swing at it. Let's make community college free in Maine permanently. I think we got the votes. Look, these three proposals, distributing relief checks, building more homes, and making free community college permanent, will provide both immediate and long-term cost relief. Now I want to talk about a few other ways that Maine people can save money, especially as we head into tax filing season. Well, as many of you know, there's significant tax relief in our current budget to keep costs down for Maine families. When I took office in 2019, there was $388 million in direct tax relief for Maine families in the biennial budget. We increased that to nearly $1.1 billion in tax relief. What does that mean for the people of Maine? It means more money back in your pockets. In Maine, if you're working and raising a child, you may very well qualify for $650 through the state's earned income tax credit. That's $650 directly back into your pocket. What's more, you may also qualify for Maine's $305 dependent exemption tax credit for your child. And this year, if your child is under the age of 6, that credit doubles to $610, thanks to Senate President Maddie Daughtry. Thank you, Senate President. Increase. Or, if you're a graduate who's paying off your school loans, you probably qualify for our student loan tax credit, once known as Opportunity Maine, which gives you a refundable tax credit of up to $2,500 a year. It's one of the most generous programs in the country for tax relief for people paying off their student loans. Or if you're an older citizen, senior citizen, you might qualify for property tax relief up to $2,000 through our property tax fairness credit. And your pension itself might well be exempt from income taxes. That's all real money back in your pocket. And I want every person in Maine to take advantage of these benefits, these refunds. So another way we're fighting to hold down costs is by fully funding the state's share of education. In 2022, we met the state's obligation to pay 55% of the cost of education for the first time in history. You're welcome. Then in 2023, we also met the state's obligation to fund revenue sharing at 5%, after the previous administration had slashed it to 2%. You all heard from the towns and cities. That means more money goes back to the towns and cities to pay police, firefighters, road crews, and local services so that less of that cost is borne by the property taxpayers. And the towns and cities appreciate it. My administration prioritized education and revenue sharing because the voters and the taxpayers demanded it. Property taxes are still too high for far too many. And of course, we have a commission created by the legislature and signed into law by me, working on that very issue today. But I know that the state of Maine has got to do whatever it can to hold down property taxes, which is why I'm including another $46 million in my supplemental budget, general funds, to maintain our commitment to pay 55% of the cost of education. I don't want to see any of those costs passed on to your property taxes. But let's talk about a few other things that we've done in education and for our schools and for the public education. So first, we're providing free school meals for all public school students statewide. You're welcome. And we've helped more than 120 school districts provide healthy, locally grown food from Maine farms. Pretty sensible. We're also repairing crumbling school infrastructure across the state. And we've expanded early childhood education with more children enrolled in pre-K than ever before. And we raised the minimum teacher salary, and we've added 1,000 teachers to the workforce. Yay, teachers. For the first time in decades, we upgraded equipment at the career and technical education centers, and enrollment at the CTEs is at its highest level ever. We expanded early college programs to serve 65,000 kids and counting. That's a lot of high school kids getting the college experience and going on. And Maine's high school graduation rate is the best it's ever been. And surveys are showing that Maine students are actually healthier and happier than they were just 2 years ago, with a significant number of them reporting an improvement in their mental health and a decrease in the need to drink, smoke, or use other substances to cope with stresses in life. Still, like many people across Maine, I was concerned when the National Assessment of Educational Progress showed declining test scores from a sampling of 1,800 Maine students in the 4th and 8th grades back in January 2024, 2 years ago. Well, as the daughter of a longtime public school teacher and someone who raised 5 daughters who went to public schools in Maine, it's important to me that every child acquires math and reading skills to set themselves up for success. Happily, Maine's own achievement tests, which test all 4th grade and 8th grade students twice a year, actually show much better results, with scores that track and even surpass the national norms. And while that broader data is encouraging, we want to do more to make sure that our students are getting the best education they can. And so I directed the Maine Department of Education to strengthen students' reading and math skills in every way they can. The department then created the Maine State Reading and Math Action Plans to bring more evidence-based instruction, educator training, and academic partnerships into Maine classrooms and improve student skills. This effort builds on a $10 million investment we made in 2024 to encourage schools to adopt the highly successful science of reading approach, teaching kids how to read. It has turned around poor literacy rates for kids across the country and is doing the same here in Maine. The Department of Education has also worked closely with individual schools to improve their student scores. So like Indian Township School Principal Molly Newell wrote us, thanking us, saying that what she's seen is not just better scores, but increased student confidence, deeper understanding of scientific concepts, and stronger preparation for future academic success. And while I'm talking about educational attainment, there's something else that stands in the way of student success, I believe. Something that's been on the top of my mind and mind of many teachers across Maine, and that's cell phones in the classroom. We know that social media can be very disruptive, especially during the school day, and disruptive to the mental health of young people. So it's time to get cell phones out of our classrooms. Tonight I propose we enact a statewide ban on cell phone use during the school day, bell to bell, to reduce distraction and disruption and keep children's attention focused on learning. When cell phones are removed from classrooms, research shows that student performance improves, test scores improve, behavior improves, attendance improves, and social dynamics improve. Makes sense. Now, some students might be upset with the idea of a ban on cell phone use at school, and it'll be a significant change for some. But I was encouraged by one senior at Morris High School in Bath who told a news station that when his school implemented the cell phone ban, he wasn't fond of it at first. But then he realized it actually was giving him more time to talk with his friends in person, including over lunch, instead of everybody looking down at their phones every minute of the school day. Change isn't always easy, but if the past 7 years have taught us anything, it's that we have to be able to adapt to new challenges. This past weekend brought another reminder of our need to adapt when dangerously cold temperatures and wind chills tested our electric grid, just as other extreme weather events have done in the past few years. While the average price of electricity in Maine is typically among the lowest in New England, that's of no comfort to Maine people who are suffering under the weight of high energy bills. I get my CMP bill in Farmington, and like a lot of folks, it's not fun to open. And that's also exactly why my administration opposed a massive rate hike from a request from CMP that the PUC rightly rejected out of hand. But the But the high price of electricity is not, as some Republican friends would say, driven predominantly by renewable energy policies. Instead, it's driven by our significant over-reliance on fossil fuels, primarily natural gas, to generate electricity. Read the studies, especially during peak periods such as this cold spell. In fact, more than half of the electricity produced in New England is generated by burning natural gas. Look at the prices. What Maine needs to do is keep diversifying our energy sources by welcoming more clean energy onto the grid in order to offset the price of natural gas. That's why we're stay with oil, I don't care. It was the British House of Commons for a second there. That is why we're procuring more cost-effective clean energy, like wind and solar here in Maine, in northern Maine in particular, and hydro from Canada, while pursuing energy storage as well. And at the same time, Efficiency Maine Trust and my energy department will be making available rebates for high-efficiency water heaters, as well as heat pumps, and for weatherization and other energy upgrades, because, after all, the best dollar saved on electricity is the one not spent. Take the Lovewell family in Caribou, for example. Their 100-year-old family home just wouldn't stay warm in the winter. Snow was blowing through the old cracked windows, and electric heating bills were in the thousands. But with weatherization funds from the state, the Lovewells replaced 14 outdated windows, insulated their home, and made other upgrades which have made their home warm and comfortable and saved them a lot on home heating bills. Quote, "Not only did it give new life to an old home," they said, "it gave comfort, safety, and enjoyment to our family." Their story's not unique. Maine has one of the oldest housing stocks in the country. And while we love these old houses, like I love mine, they're a bear to heat, especially with oil. So I'm proud to say that since I took office, we've actually cut our reliance on heating oil down from 62% of all homes to 52%. There's still a ways to go. Let's lower our energy costs by lowering our reliance on fossil fuels and make all our homes safer and more weatherproof. Another driver of high costs for Maine people, of course, is health care, especially right now. Excuse me. Here in Maine, we've worked hard to expand health care to more people, to small businesses, to the self-employed, and to families across Maine. And we have fought to make coverage more affordable. On my first day in office, I expanded Medicaid, ending my predecessor's adamant opposition to following the will of the people. And thanks to that move, nearly 230,000 people, all told, have gotten access to health care in Maine, including preventative care like cancer screenings. In 2020 and 2021 alone, Medicaid expansion reduced the cost of uncompensated care for Maine hospitals by $126 million. You're welcome. One primary care doctor in Machias wrote to me about a patient whose life had been changed because of Medicaid expansion. A young woman with significant health issues was able to restart medications because she now had health insurance. Now, he said, she's finishing her GED and going on to nursing school. He said, quote, "Our state needs more workers desperately," the doctor wrote, "but people need good health to work, and Maine care expansion has made this reality possible," end quote. Besides expanding Medicaid, we've also expanded access to private health insurance through the Affordable Care Act. Together, we enacted the Made for Maine Health Coverage Act, which established the state-based health insurance marketplace, coverme.gov, and which made many preventative care visits free or less costly. And we codified the protections of the ACA. For instance, barring an insurance company from refusing to cover you on account of a pre-existing condition. I mean, life is a pre-existing condition, isn't it? And while the U.S. Supreme Court and the federal government have rolled back the right to reproductive health care, we in Maine have fought to protect it and to expand that right. And we're not backing down. You're welcome. You want to protect women and girls, then fully fund health care for women and girls, and fully fund domestic violence shelters, and fully fund sexual assault service if you really want to protect women and girls. You're welcome. I guess that heart's not in it. We also expanded health coverage for postpartum care, a full year postpartum. And we increased funding for family planning services provided by organizations like Planned Parenthood and Maine Family Planning, on which so many people rely on for primary and preventative care. And earlier today, I was proud to announce that once again, where the federal government has fallen down, Maine will stand tall. And I propose in my supplemental budget a one-time appropriation of $2.25 million in general funds to replace the money that this president and Congress have cruelly cut from Planned Parenthood and Maine Family Planning's primary care for services. We'll do it. There's one or two people here. Nobody's making mistakes. But look, the progress we've made in health care at the state level is in jeopardy, though, because of the president and the Congress. As you know, Congress passed and the president signed legislation that I'll call the Big Bad Bill, a bill that cut billions of dollars in health care funding over the next decade in order to finance tax breaks primarily for billionaires who don't want them, don't even need them. What a backward policy. And while Maine will receive $190 million through the Rural Health Transformation Program, and we'll use those funds, well, we'll put them to good use. God, those funds pale in comparison to the estimated $5 billion in health care funds that Maine will lose over the next 10 years. What's that about? Because of the federal government's actions, upwards of 33,000 people across Maine are likely to lose access to health care. And that means missing out on basic preventative care, cancer screenings, treatment for addiction, and the fundamental basic care that every person in this state, in this nation, deserves. The loss of health care for those folks will lead to increased uncompensated care that will be absorbed by our hospitals first. They're already in difficult financial straits. And they'll be forced to pass those costs on to consumers, on to Maine people, who will pay more for health insurance or out-of-pocket care as a result. See the picture here? See the formula? And I haven't even mentioned Congress's failure to extend the enhanced ACA subsidies, which has already caused 8,500 people in Maine to abandon their health insurance altogether and driving up the cost for tens of thousands more people who are insured through the marketplace. And the number of people forced to drop their health coverage because they can't afford to pay their premiums is only expected to increase in the coming months. One man from Cumberland told us that if his premiums increase as he expects, health insurance will be the single largest expense for his whole family, more than his mortgage. A grandmother from York who's raising her 2 grandchildren told us that if her insurance rates go up, she'll have to go without health insurance. This is entirely unnecessary. It's wrong, and I want to be clear. People will die because of this. But look, even the ACA, which has become such a political football, it's only a Band-Aid on the whole problem of health care in America. And what health care really needs in this country right now is not a series of Band-Aids, it needs major surgery. Each individual state cannot, should not be left alone to grapple with this national crisis, because health care is a human right. We know it. Most people know that now. Look, the federal government is capable of big things. It was the federal government that created Social Security, and then Medicare. The federal government that passed the Civil Rights Act. It was the federal government that built the interstate highway system in the 50s under Dwight Eisenhower. The federal government sent a man to the moon. It's time for the federal government to take its head out of the sand and address the crisis of health care head on, and nothing short of universal health care is acceptable. It's an idea whose time has come. You don't have to deal with health care. That's wonderful. But listen, one more thing. Oh, you bet it is, Jim. It's the state of the state because everybody in this room has to deal with health care. And you can't be blind to that and the cost on the states all across America. And what's happening in Washington is putting huge burdens on all of us to try to do the humane thing and keep people alive and keep people healthy. It's basic human rights. But listen. Lastly, it is appropriate to pause to share a few reflections on the moment we find ourselves in. In doing so, I'm speaking to you now not as a Democrat or even as your governor, but as a mother and a grandmother and a proud native of Maine, and very simply an American citizen who, like you, deeply loves this nation and this state. But I worry about the future of our country and the fate of our democracy. I worry about the standing of our country in the eyes of the world and the standing of our country in the eyes of our own citizens. I believe we're at a dangerous moment in our history, a moment where the very idea of America is in peril. Maine's U.S. Senator Margaret Sage Smith once told us that the 4 principles of Americanism were the right to criticize, the right to hold unpopular beliefs, the right to protest, the right to independent thought. She was right. But today I see a nation where our federal government uses its immense power to intimidate and to punish, to silence those who dare to criticize or question it. A federal government that has deployed massed law enforcement onto the streets of America, including here in Maine, stoking fear in our communities and killing American citizens in Minnesota and arresting people not on public safety grounds, but based on quotas, on skin color, on accents and religion and ethnic origin. A federal government that outright ignores the constitutional rights that are guaranteed to all of us, that undermines the rule of law and even attacks the courts who uphold it. And for those who may be unconcerned by the federal government's abuses of today affecting our state, I only ask you to consider this. What happens when the federal government finds you to be the problem tomorrow? This isn't partisan. This isn't about whether you're a Democrat or a Republican or an independent. This is not about whether you live in a blue state, a red state, a purple state, a city, a suburb, a farm, or a small rural town. It is about Margaret Chase Smith's principles of Americanism. It is about the very essence of America and the fundamental tenet that here, power comes from the people. Here, the rule of law reigns. Here, everyone is treated equally under the law, and here we have no kings. What will our chapter of the American story be as our history is read to our children and grandchildren and to generations yet to come? That choice is ours today. And I have hope, because when the dawn seems furthest away, one star hangs in the night sky whose light keeps us from stumbling in the darkness. And that North Star will always help us find our way home. That North Star is the people of Maine. Over the past 7 years, I've seen people run towards gunfire to save the lives of children in Lewiston. I've seen firefighters rush to the aid of a town rocked by a deadly gas explosion in Farmington. I've seen fire and rescue crews brave howling seas to save fishermen off the coast of Cape Elizabeth. I've seen strangers line the streets of Dover-Foxcroft to welcome the remains of a World War II veteran home at last. And I know Maine National Guardsmen have been training in the freezing cold in Gilead alongside soldiers from Montenegro. I've seen business owners line their windows with paper hearts to carry on the legacy of a man who quietly spread a contagion of kindness in Portland. I've seen fans come together to cheer a new soccer team with great pride and excitement in their hearts of pine. And I've seen new Mainers build their lives here in our beloved state, finding a good home among loving and welcoming people. Welcome home. It is the people of Maine who reaffirm my faith every day that the bonds we share will not be easily dissolved, that our democracy, defended by Maine people regardless of their politics, their power, or their possessions, will not be easily discarded. And I'll tell you this, as your governor, I will defend you, I will defend our Constitution, a Constitution written by immigrants, and I will defend our democracy with everything I have. "50 years ago, farmers gathered in Mars Hill, eager to be the first of millions to celebrate this country and welcome a new dawn in the history of America. One man wrote to the people of the future, he said, quote, "We of 1976 have faith that you will be there as our fellow Americans of 1876 and 1776 had faith that we would be here. We now pass that faith on to you," he wrote. Well, I accept. 50 years hence, I hope that better minds will have eliminated the scourge of cancer, that they will have explored the depths of our oceans for untold nutrients, that they will have found a way to preserve the air we breathe and the planet we were born to, that artificial intelligence will be commonplace, but it will never replace the human touch, the human hand, or the human heart, and that peace-seeking peoples will rule the nations. More importantly, when people of 2076 look back on us, I hope they see that we were a beacon of hope in dangerous times, that we stood side by side in moments of incredible joy and immense sorrow, sharing both gratitude and grief as one, and that we refused to give in to a national drumbeat of division, doubt, and dread, that we stood tall and defended democracy, that we worked together for the lasting benefit of all. Because from Bunker Hill to Little Round Top to Mars Hill to Capitol Hill and beyond, Maine people have climbed great heights to fight for democracy and to plant that flag of liberty. Today, whistles are sounding. Alarms are ringing, calling once again for conscience, for common sense, for courage, calling for us to stand up again to defend the Constitution and to preserve the safety and security of our people, all of our people. We have the mountains of Maine at our backs, our ridgeline of courage, a spine of granite. And like our noble champions throughout history, we will lead with our hearts. For we are the people of Maine. And so, to the honorable members of the Maine legislature, it has been a privilege to serve with you. You are an incredible array of public servants, always risking the friction and controversy that comes with public affairs and with a dedication to public duty. And to my staff, my cabinet, I thank you for serving the people of Maine with hope, intelligence, and compassion. And to my family, I would not be here tonight without you, and I love you. And to the people of Maine, it has been my greatest honor to serve as your governor these past 7 years. Thank you. For the bottom of my heart.
That was Maine Governor Janet Mills delivering her State of the State address to a special joint session of the legislature. Now, the Republican response.
Good evening. I'm House Republican Leader Billy Bob Fockingham of Winter Harbor. It's from the perspective of a husband, father of three, and tax-paying, bill-paying Mainer that I deliver tonight's response. Tonight, the governor delivered her State of the State address. But the real state of Maine isn't found in prepared remarks. It's felt at the kitchen table, at the gas pump, and when the electric bill arrives. Maine people are hurting. We face some of the largest electric cost increases in the nation, some of the highest taxes, and a cost of living that keeps rising while wages fall behind. People are doing everything right, working hard, playing by the rules, and still falling further behind. That is not the Maine promise. Our greatest exports should be lobsters, blueberries, potatoes, and lumber, not our young people. Yet too many are leaving because they can't afford to stay, can't find opportunity, or don't see a future here. After 8 years of one-party Democratic leadership, the results are clear. Out-of-state corporations are thriving. Solar scammers are cashing in. Meanwhile, Maine's traditional industries, fishing, forestry, farming, and manufacturing are struggling to survive. That's not progress, that's neglect. Our healthcare system is in crisis, especially in rural Maine. Hospitals are operating in the red. Services are being cut. Access to care is shrinking. Families are left wondering where they'll go in an emergency. At the same time, we've seen widespread welfare fraud and abuse, particularly in the Maine care system. Fraudsters have targeted it, and what we know today may only be the beginning. That's taxpayer money, meant to help vulnerable people, money that comes from families already stretched thin. This administration has turned its back on Maine's girls, telling them they don't deserve a level playing field in sports or privacy in their spaces. We reject that. Every child deserves fairness. Every girl deserves an opportunity. Despite soaring energy costs, crushing taxes, and a rising cost of living, Mainers are being told the state still wants more taxes, more fees, more regulation. Businesses hear that message clearly. And then we ask why they don't come or why they leave. Who can survive high taxes, high energy costs, and endless regulation? The truth is, the state is poor, but the people of Maine are strong. They've endured, they've adapted, they've survived. But it should not be this hard to live, work, or raise a family in the state we love. Maine is the most beautiful state in the country. We have abundant natural resources, skilled workers, and proud communities. Under the right leadership, we can also be one of the most prosperous states in America. I believe Mainers are ready for a new direction, one where hard work is rewarded, where merit matters, where businesses are welcomed, not punished, and where jobs are created here because companies can afford to stay. Maine can do better. Maine must do better. And together, I believe we will.
I'm Senator Trey Stewart from Aroostook County, and I'm honored to serve as the Republican leader in the Maine Senate. Maine isn't complicated. We believe in right and wrong. You work hard, you tell the truth, and you take responsibility, especially if you're in charge. Tonight, we have to be honest. That's no longer the case. After nearly 8 years of one-party control, Maine finds itself dealing with fraud, deception, and decay. Taxes are rising, fees are piling up, families are paying more for everyday life while government keeps asking for more, even now forcing us to pay new taxes on things like streaming services. At the same time, our education system has fallen from where it once stood near the top nationally to rankings that should concern every parent in this state. And fraud that was once isolated has become widespread, accepted, explained away, and too often ignored. This did not happen by accident. We got here for one reason and one reason only: failed leadership. A failure to protect taxpayers, a failure to protect our kids, and a failure to protect basic accountability and public trust. The governor and I agree on one thing: Maine people are struggling. Where we disagree is on why and what comes next. Republicans believe Mainers aren't struggling because government is too small or taxes are too low. They're struggling because government lost sight of its role and its responsibility. That's why legislative Republicans are fighting for real, common sense tax relief. No tax on tips, no tax on overtime, and a higher standard deduction so families can keep more of what they earn. These reforms reward work, respect effort, and give people breathing room again. Yet, we're told the state can't afford this, while there never seems to be a shortage of money for new programs, new bureaucracies, and new government initiatives. There's always money to grow government, but never enough to give relief to the people paying the bills. That's not a budget problem. That's a priorities problem. We also hear a lot about increased state spending on education and revenue sharing with towns, programs that were meant to lower property taxes. Yet Maine still ranks among the highest property tax states in the nation, while education outcomes continue to slide. Money isn't the problem. Leadership is. The same is true with MaineCare. As serious allegations of fraud continue to surface, Republicans believe accountability is not optional. Every dollar lost to fraud is a dollar taken from a child, a senior, or a person with disabilities who truly depends on that program. Protecting taxpayers and protecting the vulnerable go hand in hand. But here's the most important point tonight. This can change. Maine has faced hard moments before, and we've met them with responsibility and resolve. More than a century ago, Maine leader Joshua Chamberlain reminded us of what real leadership looks like when he said, quote, "The power of ideas is in the example they set." Leadership matters because examples matter, and Maine deserves better examples from those in charge. We can choose a different path, one that restores trust, rewards work, protects the vulnerable, and lives within its means. Republicans are ready to lead with clarity, accountability, and common sense. Maine's best days are not behind us, but getting back there requires leadership willing to tell the truth and strong enough to act on it. Again, I'm Senator Trace Stewart of Aroostook County, and I thank you for joining me tonight. God bless our great state and our great nation.
That was the Republican response to Governor Mills' 2026 State of the State address. Once again, here is Maine Public's Steve Mistler.
Well, welcome back. We have a lot to talk about and not much time to do it, but I just want to, that was one of the most combative sort of State of the State addresses I've seen. At one point, the governor was being catcalled from some of the audience members. Some Republicans actually left the chamber. And this really happened at the end of the speech, right, where she started talking about national issues, which I think was a good solid 20 minutes. And I think some of the Republicans in the chamber really objected to some of the things that she was saying. What was your takeaway from some of that, Kevin?
Yeah, I think it was a different kind of speech than we've heard from Governor Mills in the past and other governors. I've been around this place more than 15 years, so have you. I think, Sue, you've been here even longer. I've never seen a situation where Republicans have stood up, or members of either party have stood up during a State of the State speech and walked out.
That's right.
She used the lines, "You're welcome," over and over again, and when she did that, she turned to the Republicans. And when she was talking about some of her policy accomplishments, she would turn and look at them as if kind of challenging them and saying, "This is what I did for you and for your constituents." So it was a different kind of speech than we'd heard from Governor Mills in the past.
Yeah, Sue, what do you think?
Yeah, she was definitely very feisty, like you said, a little bit combative. She did come around to mention some policy changes and some priorities, $300 relief checks for folks, $70 million for housing, free community college, and making that permanent. So there was some of that at the beginning of the speech, but like you said, then it kind of evolved into democracy, calls for universal health care, which is obviously a federal issue. A Republican said, what does that have to do with state government? And she kind of said, well, because we all have health care and we all need it. So as we talked about in the open, the overshadowing a little bit of the end of the speech because of her run for the Senate.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I think the speech it was a lot of looking back at accomplishments. There were a few new initiatives in here. I mean, there was the statewide ban on cell phones in classrooms, bell to bell, as she described it. That's a new initiative. Relief payments, which would be, I think, the third time that the state has actually done that. I think she's talking about $300 per person, and something like 725 qualifying Maine residents would maybe get one of those checks if this passes. An extension of free community college, reviving that and putting it in statute, which is different than in past initiatives because that was always in the budget. And so this time, if it actually passes, it would be in law, and it would actually take an act of the legislature to reverse it. So those are a couple of highlights. Did I miss, Kevin? Or?
Yeah, no, I think you hit the highlights. Definitely the $300 rebate check is significant, and I'm sure lots of folks will welcome that. There was talk of some additional, I think $70 million for housing initiatives, basically to continue what they've already done. But a lot of her speech really talked more about accomplishments. There weren't many new initiatives in here, and partly that's probably because they don't have a lot of money. And then, as we talked about beforehand, they have this rainy day fund, and she is proposing to dip into this rainy day fund to provide these rebate checks to Mainers and to do some of these other initiatives, and that's a change for her.
And as we just heard from the Republicans, they see things very differently. Their state of the state, so to speak, is a lot darker. It's a much more bleak outlook. They blame Democrats. They say if we have an affordability crisis, well, they've been in charge. So why are they now just recognizing this? And they hit on, electricity prices and other drivers of things that really hit people home every day. So it really is, in addition to being kind of a combative address and response to the address, we see a lot of different priorities from both parties.
It's kind of the inverse of what we're seeing nationally with Democrats pointing the finger at Republicans in Congress and the White House for the affordability issues. Here in Maine, where Democrats actually control state government, the Republicans are pointing at Democrats and saying, actually, it's your fault and your policies. Any final thoughts?
Yeah, I think that's exactly what Senator Trey Stewart was doing at the end of the Republican response. He was basically summing up saying, we've seen 8 years of this, now you have a choice. So they weren't announcing any new initiatives on their behalf. They were basically saying, it's now voters' turn, and if you elect Republicans in November, things will be better.
It'll be interesting to see now how it all plays out through the end of the legislative session. This second session is always much more tense than the first.
That's right, and that's because, not only is Governor Mills seeking another office in the U.S. Senate, but every legislator is up for re-election this year too. So this year's elections are very much in everybody's mind. Lots more to talk about. We'll have to hit that in the follow-up coverage. But thank you everybody for joining us this evening on behalf of Maine Public and everybody. Thanks again, and stay safe, and we'll talk to you soon.
To see or hear Governor Mills' speech again, or for news and additional analysis, go to mainepublic.org.